Music, champagne, and the sound of a slap. That's how my daughter-in-law greeted me on her wedding day. Not a metaphor. A real slap sharp enough to leave her handprint on my face. I stood there beneath the crystal chandelier as laughter froze mid-air and the band stopped playing. No one spoke. Not one person. Even my son Daniel only lowered his head pretending to fix his tie. I thought I'd seen every kind of battle in my life. But nothing compares to the sting of betrayal, especially when it carries your own last name. My name is Robert Hughes, 60 years old, veteran, widower. I lived a quiet life in my small Savannah home until that night when my son's bride looked me in the eye and said, "Give me the house keys, old man. You don't need it anymore." The slap was just the beginning, because by the next morning, everything she thought she owned would start to vanish. June 2024, Austin, Texas. Royal Oaks Country Club glowed like a palace, white roses, expensive wine silk tablecloths. The rich and cheerful toasted the perfect couple. I walked in alone. Gray suit, dark tie, shoes polished since dawn. No one noticed. I preferred it that way. I stood near the bar watching. Daniel, my son, tall, lean, handsome, in a perfect tuxedo. His eyes dodged mine when they met. Juliana, the bride, beautiful, in a cold, practiced way. Every smile looked rehearsed, sweet enough to please, fake enough to warn. I've met all kinds of people in my life. But Juliana Brooks, she was the kind who could say thank you in a tone that made you feel like you owed her something. The MC spoke. Music swelled. Guests laughed. Someone handed me a glass of champagne, chilled, golden, bubbling. I smiled but didn't drink. Then it was her turn. Juliana stepped onto the stage, her white dress glittering under the lights. She held the microphone with a calm confidence, the kind of confidence that comes when someone believes the whole room belongs to them. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice smooth but edged. "And a special thanks to Mr. Hughes." She turned toward me, smiling like it was a joke for raising such a wonderful man, a man I'll be taking care of from now on. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd, small, uneasy. I nodded once, silent. But she wasn't finished. "Oh, and one more thing," she said, her tone turning icy. "Mr. Hughes, maybe you don't need that big house in Savannah anymore. Let us take care of it for you. Seems wasteful, one old man living all alone." The laughter died mid-air. All eyes turned toward me. Juliana's gaze locked on mine, bright, sharp, glassy. And then the slap. No one moved. No one breathed. Her pale hand swung through the air, the sound echoing through the hall. A glass shattered somewhere. Her chest heaved as she hissed, "Give me the keys. You don't need that house anymore." I didn't move, didn't speak, just lifted my hand and straightened my tie. My eyes found Daniel standing behind her, frozen. He opened his mouth, then closed it. In that shining ballroom, I could hear my own heartbeat, slow, steady, mechanical, like the ticking of my old army watch. Silence thickened. Then I said quietly, every word deliberate, "Enjoy tonight, Juliana, because your honeymoon will end sooner than you think." Her smile vanished. The crowd looked down. A few coughed. A few stepped back. The band tried to start again, a weak drum beat off rhythm lost. No one was listening anymore. I turned, walked away, my footsteps echoing on the polished floor. Each step sounded like a countdown. No one stopped me. Not even my son. The hallway stretched ahead, lit by rows of chandeliers. I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall gray hair, a faint red mark on my cheek, and eyes that held no anger, just calm resolve. A soldier once taught me the right kind of silence can frighten an enemy more than gunfire. I opened the doors to the garden. Night air rushed in cool damp, carrying the scent of grass and spilled champagne. Behind me, the laughter returned, weak, forced, hollow. They were pretending nothing had happened. Good. They'd be pretending for a long time. I walked past the empty chairs and strings of white lights above. A moth landed on an abandoned glass, its wings trembling. Everything beautiful fades. I sat down, touched my cheek, the burn still fresh. But the real pain wasn't there. It lived deeper in the silence of my son. I thought of Linda, my wife. If she were here, she'd smile softly and say, "Silence isn't weakness, Robert. It's preparation." I smiled dry like steel. "You were right, Linda. This time I'll be ready." I pulled out my phone, scrolled down the contacts. The last name was still there, Carter Johnson, attorney. I pressed call. He picked up after 2 rings. "Mr. Hughes, it's been a while." My voice was steady. "Carter, I need you to bring me what we discussed back in 2015. The documents related to the trust." A pause. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." I hung up. Set the phone on the garden table. From inside, the sounds drifted out, glasses clinking, strained laughter music, trying to patch the damage. By morning, they'd all forget. But I wouldn't. The Austin sky was clear as glass. Lights shimmered on the pool beyond. I looked down and saw my reflection, calm, sharp, unbroken. When I finally rose, a breeze pushed the door behind me shut. Inside, the bride laughed again. My son raised his glass. The performance went on, but inside me everything had already shifted. The slap lasted 1 second. The cost of it would last a lifetime. She thought I was just an old man, polite, harmless. She was wrong. I don't react with anger. I react with justice. And justice in the hands of a soldier never makes noise. It simply arrives. On time. The music stopped. The violin froze mid-note. The sound hung in the air like a stretched string waiting to snap. Inside Royal Oaks, the air went still as if someone had stolen all the oxygen. A guest whispered, trembling, "Was that part of the show?" No one answered. No one moved. Glasses stopped clinking. Laughter died mid-breath, strangled by embarrassment. Laura, the wedding videographer, kept filming. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't dare stop. The lens captured everything: the shattered glass, the reflection of the chandelier, and me, the man standing motionless with a red mark across his face. Daniel, my son, stood next to his bride. His collar was crooked, eyes down. No words, no step forward. Silence. And that silence, not the slap, was the real wound. I turned away, walking through 100 eyes that refused to meet mine. It felt like crossing a battlefield, where people were too afraid to touch the fallen. The hallway stretched long, lit by dim yellow sconces hanging low. My footsteps echoed on the marble floor, slow, even, cold. The air smelled of lilies and champagne, sweet, heavy, artificial. An older man, Lieutenant Mason, a friend from the Veterans Hall, took a hesitant step toward me. But Daniel caught his eye and gave the slightest shake of his head. Mason stopped. His shoulders sank. He understood there are moments a man must face alone. The doors to the garden opened. Night air slipped in cool, clean reel. White lights were strung across the trees like glowing threads. Crickets sang somewhere in the dark, mixing with the faint hum of music bleeding from inside. I touched my cheek, the skin still burned, but what I felt inside was colder than the air. Not shame, not anger. Something quieter. Something only soldiers understand, the stillness before a counterattack. Some battles don't begin with gunfire, I thought. They begin with a slap, and some people think they've already won only because the other side hasn't answered yet. I walked along the stone path, my shadow stretching long and broken by the hanging lights. A few guests smoked on the lawn, pretending not to see me. One woman whispered, "Lord, how rude." Her companion tugged her arm. "Shh, that's the Hughes daughter-in-law." I heard them both. I kept walking. Inside, the band tried to play again, a lively jazz tune, offbeat and desperate, like someone gluing pieces of a shattered mirror. The room had lost its shine. It smelled of fear and shame. I looked up at the rows of white lights swaying in the breeze. They reminded me of barbed wire back in the barracks, beautiful, cold, and full of memories that don't fade. And I thought of Linda, my wife. She once told me silence isn't for suffering, Robert. It's for preparation. I'd forgotten that. Until tonight, when I saw how cruelty can wear a smile. A young waiter stepped outside carrying a silver tray of champagne. "Mr. Hughes," he asked gently, "are you all right?" I looked at the bubbling glass, tiny golden beads rising under the light. I shook my head. "No, thank you." He nodded and disappeared, quick, careful, like someone leaving a church. I sat by the pool. The water shimmered with the reflection of 1,000 little lights. A duck drifted across, sending quiet ripples outward. The night held its breath. And in that silence, I could hear something shift inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is for the weak. What I felt now was certainty, the kind that settles deep, like when you look through a scope and know the next shot will land true. A shadow approached. Mason, my old friend, couldn't stay inside any longer. He sat down beside me, voice low. "Robert, what just happened? I'm sorry I didn't step in." I smiled faintly, still watching the water. "You don't owe me an apology, Mason. Remember the old rule," he nodded. "Observe in silence. Strike later." "That's right." I looked at the pool. "And I still follow it." He sighed. "I heard your son married rich. Her family runs some logistics company, right?" "Yeah." "Money makes people lose their minds." "No," I said quietly. "Money doesn't make them lose it. It just convinces them that honor has no value." From inside, forced applause. The band switched to something upbeat, fake joy over fractured pride. I stood, straightened my jacket. My pulse was calm, steady as a metronome. Nothing in that room could shake the rhythm of a man who's already survived war. I walked toward the parking lot. Behind me, Mason called softly, "What are you going to do, Robert?" I paused, didn't turn. Nothing tonight. But tomorrow, they'll start wondering what began. The car door opened. Warm cabin light spilled across the seat. My old army watch lay on the dashboard, its second hand ticking steady, patient. I pulled an old business card from the glove box, Carter Johnson, attorney at law. It had been 10 years, but trust, like justice, never expires. It only waits for the right time. Through the rearview mirror, I could still see the ballroom crystal lights, glowing silhouettes, laughing as if nothing had happened. I turned the key. The engine hummed low, even predatory. Jazz floated faintly through the night, then faded into the dark. People say, don't react when you're humiliated. I agree. Reaction is what they expect. Silence, that's what terrifies them. Because in silence they don't know what you're thinking, and fear always begins with not knowing. I stopped at the gate. The guard smiled. "Beautiful night, Mr. Hughes." I replied, "Yes." Beautiful and dangerous. As I drove away from Royal Oaks, I looked once more in the mirror. The lights behind me shimmered like 100 eyes watching. But I knew only one person wouldn't sleep tonight. Juliana Brooks, the woman who thought she could slap a soldier and rest easy. The road ahead was quiet. Oaks lined both sides, casting long, sharp shadows across the asphalt. The engine's hum sounded like the breath of something patient, something hunting. Beside me, my phone lit up Carter Johnson. I didn't answer. Just watched the glow reflect on my face, a face that would never look the same again. In the Army, we learned one thing: never pull the trigger while you still feel. Wait until your mind is cold as steel. Tonight, I'm not angry. I'm just ready. That night, I drove 3 hours from Austin back to Savannah. The highway stretched endless and empty. My headlights cut through the dark, carving white lines into the asphalt like old scars. The radio played low, a Johnny Cash song from another lifetime, dry and hollow as wind through glass. I don't remember how many miles I drove, just that my hands stayed locked on the wheel, and my mind replayed that single moment, the slap echoing through the hall, and Daniel's eyes lowered, avoiding mine. That was when I realized something. The boy I raised no longer existed. It was past midnight when I pulled up to my small wooden house on the outskirts of Savannah. The world was quiet. Cicadas hummed in the heat, and from somewhere downriver came the soft rhythm of the tide brushing the banks. I shut off the engine and sat there for a long minute. Moonlight caught the wooden sign by the porch, Hughes Residence. Linda carved it herself years ago. The house was simple gray roof, neat lawn, white fence. Not big, not fancy, but it was the only place I'd never had to bow my head. I stepped inside and switched on the light. The warm yellow glow filled the room. A faded wedding photo on the wall. A cracked leather armchair in the corner. A solid oak table in the middle of the room. On that table sat a dark wooden box engraved with 2 words, Semper Fidelis. Always faithful. I opened it. Inside lay the pieces of a lifetime Daniel's graduation photo, my old unit badge, Linda's letters, and a certificate, Honor Student Daniel Hughes, 2009. I remembered the afternoons when he was little, riding in my old Jeep after school, chalk dust on his hands, laughing so hard the mirrors shook. One day I sold that Jeep to pay his college tuition. He cried. I told him a man doesn't need a car to go far. He just needs honor to walk straight. Honor. I whispered the word again. It felt heavier now. It had lived quietly inside me for years, until the night I saw my son stand beside the woman who slapped his father. When Linda died in 2016, I created the Veterans Living Trust, not to protect money, but to protect meaning, to guard what my life had been built on: discipline, duty, and dignity. I wanted Daniel to have security, a future, a legacy. But I was wrong about one thing. You can leave someone your estate, but you can't leave them your integrity. I went into the kitchen and brewed a cup of black coffee. The bitterness woke my body, but chilled my heart. On the table lay a white envelope stamped Savannah First Federal Bank. It had arrived 3 days ago, just before the wedding. I hadn't opened it. I tore the seal and unfolded the statement. Lines of numbers blurred before my eyes. Account activity cosign, Robert A. Hughes, Juliana B. Hughes, loan approved, $250, $1,000. I frowned. Electronic signatures perfectly forged. Below a note, Purpose real estate investment. Joint approval via e-sign. Juliana. Her name printed right beside mine. I leaned back, staring at the page. No rage, no shock. Only a silence so deep it felt like the air before a storm. She hadn't just humiliated me in front of strangers. She'd used my name, my honor, to borrow money. A soldier can bleed and survive, but he cannot stand by while someone steals his honor. I went to the bookshelf and slid open a hidden drawer beneath the third shelf. Inside was the original copy of the living trust I'd signed with Carter Johnson. 10 yellowed pages, legal binding, sacred. Linda's small, precise signature still marked the corner. In trust, we protect what we've built. I placed my hand over her name. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about the Hughes name and what it stood for. I looked around the room. Everything Linda left behind was still here. The potted plants by the window, the half-knit sweater on the couch, the framed photo of Daniel between us at 18. I remembered that day, my arm around him, Linda laughing, saying, "Keep that picture close, Robert. Someday, you'll need a reason to remember why you started." Now I knew. My reason was tonight. The army clock on the table showed 2 a.m. The coffee had gone cold. I sat there watching the backyard trees sway in the wind. Moonlight slipped through the window, landing on Linda's smiling face in the frame. I could almost hear her whisper, "Robert, you don't have to shout to prove anything. Just let the truth do its work." My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Hello, Mr. Hughes, this is Amelia Grant. I used to work with Linda on her charity projects. I think you should see this." Attached was a photo, a credit report under my name tagged Joint Owner Juliana Brooks Hughes. I stared at it for a long moment. A chill ran down my spine. Not fear, confirmation. I called her back immediately. Her voice was calm, professional, brisk. "Mr. Hughes, I don't mean to intrude, but someone's been using your identity for a real estate loan in Austin. If I'm right, the property is listed under your son's name." My voice stayed steady. "Can you give me the address, South Congress Avenue, Tower B," she said. "Signed with your electronic ID dated April 14th. I was silent for a few seconds, then said, "Thank you, Amelia. I owe you one." I ended the call. Outside, the moon climbed higher, its light glinting off the wooden box on the table. The carved words caught the silver glow, Semper Fidelis. I whispered, "Always faithful." But this time, not to them, to myself. I didn't sleep that night. Something inside me had snapped. Not my heart, my trust. I took out my old leather jacket. Inside the pocket was my military ID card, the one I'd never stopped carrying. I placed it beside the bank envelope. One symbol of honor, one of betrayal. Side by side, the two halves of my life, before and after the slap. I turned off the light. The room fell into shadow moonlight, spilling across the floor like spilled truth. At the doorway, I looked back one last time at the home where Linda used to smile every morning. And I said softly, "I promise, Linda, I won't fight with anger. I'll fight with justice. They say kindness brings reward." I once believed that, until the night my own son stayed silent while his wife struck his father. That's when I learned sometimes justice doesn't come to the kind. It comes to those who stay silent, long enough to act. Morning in Savannah broke thin as paper sunlight slipping through the blinds sliding across the wooden table. I brewed a pot of coffee. The bubbling sounded like someone tapping a spoon against porcelain. On the radio, a host talked about rising mortgage rates and another wave of credit fraud cases. I turned it off mid-sentence. I didn't need another reminder of that word. The phone lit up. I scrolled to Amelia Grant, the woman who'd worked with Linda years ago. She understood banks, and she understood how clever people slipped between laws. I called. 3 rings. Amelia speaking, her voice warm, alert, like she'd been waiting. "Robert here," I said. "I need to see what you sent last night in detail." "You home?" she asked. "Check your email." "I just sent it." A soft chime, new message received. "Credit report," she said. "I redacted your SSN, but it's enough for you to see the problem." I opened the file. Cold numbers marched across the screen in neat columns. Borrower Juliana B. Hughes, cosigner Robert A. Hughes, amount $250,000, purpose real estate investment location, Austin TX method, e-signature timestamp April 14th. I never signed this. Murmured more to myself than to her. "I know," she replied. "The e-sign was verified through your SSN, date of birth and address. Someone had full access." I leaned back in my chair, the silence heavy as lead. "What would you suggest? Call your attorney," she said. "Don't reach out to them. Let them believe you're standing still." I thanked her and hung up. Only the smell of coffee and the ticking of the clock filled the house. Through the kitchen window, the backyard looked too calm, like the night before had been nothing but a dream. But dreams don't leave numbers on paper. Numbers do. I scrolled to Carter Johnson, the man who'd helped Linda and me build the Veterans Living Trust after she passed the armor we forged to protect everything we built together. He answered on the second ring, voice slow and solid. "Robert." "I need you," I said. I figured. "Tell me what happened." I told him. Everything. Word for word. When I stopped, there was only silence, the faint sound of his pen tapping the desk. Then, "Did you ever give them your SSN?" And just like that, the memory hit a scene frozen in my mind. Juliana sitting across from me last spring, cream-colored dress, smile polished to perfection. Her manicured nail traced a form across the table. "Your name just makes things smoother, Robert." I remembered nodding. She'd said it was for tax optimization. "I did," I said quietly. "When they filed for the Austin house, she said it would help their family taxes." Carter exhaled, then his tone hardened into clarity. "All right. From this moment on, you don't call Daniel. You don't text Juliana. We'll request a forensic log from the bank IP address device timestamp. I'll file a fraud claim and trigger the asset protection clause in your trust. But Robert, I need you to answer this one thing. Are you ready to take this all the way?" I didn't hesitate. I'm not the kind of man who stops halfway. "Then prepare," he said. "This will take months. Justice doesn't run on adrenaline. It runs on paperwork." He paused. "Robert, I'm sorry about last night." "Last night was an invitation," I replied. "Today's the real party." When the call ended, the house filled with the creak of old wood and the sharp, surgical cold of morning. I walked to the low cabinet, pulled open the third drawer. The dark blue folder was still there. Veterans Living Trust, 2016. Next to my signature was Linda's neat and straight. "In trust, we protect what we've built." The ink had faded a little, but her steadiness hadn't. Everything about Linda was like that, clean, exact, unwavering. I placed the file on the table, sipped the bitter coffee. The open envelope from Savannah First Federal still lay beside it. One represented armor I built myself, the other the knife someone had slipped between its seams. The phone buzzed again, an email from Carter. He'd already pulled the e-signature log. The IP address traced back to a luxury apartment tower on South Congress. Austin time-stamped the exact afternoon Juliana had told me she was busy getting her dress fitted. I opened my black notebook and wrote in tight military shorthand, confirm $250K loan, forged e-sign, IP South Congress Tower. Phase 1, stay silent. Phase 2, build the frame. I closed the book. The pieces started to align, clean, mechanical. No music, no drama. Just rhythm, discipline, precision. A memory surfaced. 14 months earlier. Juliana had come to this very table, a stack of papers in her hand, her tone sweet, practiced. Just one small signature, she'd said. To merge family tax records. You'll stay the official homeowner. Lenders love seeing a man's name behind it. It just makes things smoother. I didn't smile. But I didn't refuse either. She didn't leave the forms. She took photos instead. Now I knew why. Outside, the sun climbed. The wind rattled the maple leaves, scattering light across the porch. I sat down on the wooden chair, my palm resting on the box engraved Semper Fidelis. The wood was cool against my skin, like touching an old promise. I wondered why Juliana couldn't stop at a lavish wedding and a polite request. Maybe because people like her never stop. They mistake charm for permission. But some doors don't open with smiles. They open with case files and court orders. A delivery truck pulled up. The mailman handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a courier notice from Carter's office, a checklist of what to bring: original trust copy, bank statements, property records, any link between your SSN and Juliana's transactions. I gathered each item, sliding them into a hard folder. When I closed it, the snap sounded like a rifle bolt. The phone lit again, Daniel. I didn't answer. It rang 4 times, then silence. A message appeared, Dad, about last night. Don't listen to what people are saying about Juliana. She just overreacted. Another ping. Also, I need your signature on a small tax form. I'll stop by later this week. I read it. Didn't reply. I left it there, like placing a knife on a table and deciding not to use it. Not yet. A crow landed on the white fence outside, tilting its head at me, its rough call slicing through the sunlight. I remembered Carter's words. Legal justice runs on documents. It's slow, but it arrives. A soldier understands that rhythm. You don't fire when your heart is hot. You wait until your breath is steady, your hands firm, and then you pull the trigger. I brought the folder back inside, set it beside the cold cup of coffee. On top, I placed a small handwritten note. Don't call, don't text, don't explain. 3 sentences for myself. A reminder that emotion has no place in strategy. Before leaving the room, I pulled Linda's photo closer, her eyes gentle, direct. Linda, I whispered, I won't yell. I won't beg. I'll let the truth do the talking. Outside, the sun stood high. I locked the door twice, the clean metallic click ringing like punctuation. Some sounds mean closure. That one always did. My shadow stretched long across the driveway as I walked to the car. Each step felt deliberate, grounded. I placed the folder into the trunk carefully, like setting down something sharp. The lid slammed shut, final, heavy, precise. The climax of that morning was a single small motion. I blocked both Daniel and Juliana's numbers. Not out of fear, but out of respect for my own rhythm. I started the engine. The hum was low, steady, clean. Through the windshield, the Savannah sky glowed deep blue. I drove off without checking the mirror. No reason to look back. There was nothing left behind that needed explaining. Sweet words, I said to myself, but that was a cold cut. I repeated it like a breathing drill, inhale, exhale, the way soldiers prepare before the mission. Then I did what every soldier learns to do, took one long breath, let it go slow, and began. Night fell fast over Savannah. No rain, just the heavy salt wind rolling in from the river, brushing through the trees outside my house. I sat alone in the living room. The desk lamp cast a narrow glow over the stack of files Carter had sent that afternoon, a copy of the fraud complaint, the bank's formal notice, and one sheet heavier than the rest, confirmation that all accounts under my name were officially frozen. I read every line, marking them in red, like a soldier checking his list before deployment. Everything precise, everything quiet. Outside, the full moon hung low, its cold light spilling across the wooden floor like a silver blade. Then the phone buzzed. Juliana Brooks Hughes. Her name glowed on the screen. My heartbeat slowed, steady, deliberate. The slap, her smile, that sweet venom-laced voice, all of it returned in a single pulse. I didn't hesitate. I answered. Her voice was different now, no longer calm, no longer polished. There was alcohol in it, and anger trembling underneath. "What are you doing, Robert? I heard you talk to a lawyer. You trying to drag us into trouble?" I leaned back in my chair. Said nothing. Her breathing quickened, a woman trying to sound composed but losing grip. "Don't forget," she said, lowering her tone, stretching every word like a blade. "Daniel is your son. You don't want to ruin his happiness, do you?" I stayed silent. So silent I could hear the faint clink of a glass being set down too hard on her end. Then her voice sharpened, high and cutting. "Who's going to believe you, Robert? Some lonely old veteran accusing his daughter-in-law of fraud. You have no proof. Or maybe you're just jealous." I closed my eyes, listened to the slow rhythm of my own heartbeat, then said quietly, just enough to cut through the air, "You should get some rest, Juliana. You sound tired tonight." She laughed, short, dry, brittle. "You think I'm afraid of you? You have no idea what I'm capable of." I answered, my tone the same calm, grounded cold as water over steel. "And you have no idea what I've done to protect my honor." Silence. 3 seconds. 5. Then click. The sound of the line cutting clean through the quiet. People only tremble, I thought, when they touch something they know will burn. I set the phone down. The lamp's glow caught the reflection in the glass frame across the room. An older man, deep lines around the eyes, but the eyes still sharp, still awake. On the table beside the files sat 6 old letters bound with a piece of green paracord. I untied it. The paper smelled of ink and time. The first letter was dated 2018, addressed to Daniel but never sent. I read it aloud, my voice low, steady, like a confession to an empty room. "Son, if you ever let someone else control you, you'll lose yourself long before you lose your father." I paused, stared at that line for a long time. When I wrote it, I didn't know her name yet. Now I did. And I realized the letter was written for her too. I read through each one, each letter a mile marker on the road where Daniel had been drifting away. 2019. I warned him not to borrow money for a house, that debt can quietly kill a man's pride. 2020. I told him I was still paying his insurance even though he hadn't thanked me in years. 2021. Only 2 sentences. "You don't speak to me anymore, but I still pray for you every morning. I no longer pray for your success. I pray you learn your limits. I folded each letter neatly, stacked them together. They were never mailed. But tonight, I realized, they had already served their purpose, the final words of a father, before silence became his weapon. The lamp flickered once, then steadied again. Outside, the wind hissed through the shutters. I rose and stepped onto the porch. The air was cool. The moonlight drew sharp edges around every leaf and branch. In the distance, the low moan of a ship's horn drifted from the harbor, long, slow, ancient. In the army, I thought we learned to recognize the enemy through silence. The loud ones are rarely dangerous. It's the quiet call after dark that's when guilt starts talking. Back inside, Juliana's number still glowed in the call log. 10 p.m. I noted it in my case record for Carter. Subject contacted. Tone defensive. Possible awareness of investigation. I turned on the lamp again. The warm light fell across Linda's photo on the wall. Her smile soft, patient. But tonight, I saw something else in it, approval. You see it, don't you, Linda? I whispered. She thought honor was something you could borrow with a signature. Then a knock at the door. 3 short taps. I tilted my head, listening. It was Joseph, my neighbor and an old unit friend. He stood on the porch holding a bottle of whiskey. Saw your light was still on, he said, smiling faintly. Figured you weren't sleeping. I invited him in. We didn't talk much, just poured 2 glasses. The whiskey glowed amber under the lamp. Joseph raised his glass. You know what I like about you, Robert? What's that? You don't need to shout to scare people. You just stay quiet, and they start to worry. I smiled, tired but genuine. Silence is scarier than gunfire, Joe. It makes people hear their own heartbeat. We clinked glasses. The whiskey burned sharp but gentle. Joseph didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. Some stories aren't meant to be told. They're meant to be witnessed. When he left, the clock read 11:40. I cleared the table, placed the 6 letters inside the Semper Fidelis box, and closed the lid. The sound of wood meeting wood, clean, solid, final. A sound I've always trusted more than any promise. I turned off the lamp. Moonlight stretched across the floor, pale, precise, unflinching. I sat on the edge of the bed, removed my watch, and placed it beside my old military ID. Another day ended, no shouting, no tears. Only one sentence repeated in my head, steady as a distant drumbeat. If you let others control you, you'll lose yourself long before you lose your father. Juliana thought I'd fight back with anger. But anger only shows your plan. Silence makes them guess, and fear begins when guessing never stops. She started this game, but I'm the one who writes the rules. Morning in Savannah rose inside a wall of fog. The sky looked gray like dust brushed across an old mirror. I drove down Main Street past tiny cafes, antique stores, and the faded sign of the Savannah Veterans Hall. Inside, the air smelled of old wood leather polish and dark coffee, the scent of a place that had held more silence than noise. I paused at the wall of photos, young faces staring straight ahead, eyes bright and unafraid, under a bronze plaque that read, "We served. We remember." Then Joseph Reed, my unit mate from '84, stepped out of the meeting room. Same bomber jacket, same unit patch. He smiled, half warmth, half worry. "Robert, I just told them you'd never sit quietly at home." I answered, half joking, half true. "You know me. No rest till the mission's done." We sat in the corner booth with the burn mark from someone's cigarette years ago and ordered 2 black coffees. Joseph studied me for a while before speaking. "Doc says your heart's weak. You quit the meds again." I smiled, setting the cup down. There are things stronger than medicine, Joe, like finding out you've been lied to. He exhaled, eyes lifting toward the ceiling. Carter filled me in. Juliana forged your name. I nodded. Not just my name. She tried to steal my honor. I can live without money. I can't live without that. Joseph frowned. You sure you want to do this? Once you start, there's no turning back. I met his eyes, voice steady. Then they shouldn't have assumed I'd stay still. He smiled bitterly. War never ends, Robert. It just changes shape. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a small note. Contacts for a veterans legal group. If you need witnesses to confirm how you handled the foundation, they'll testify. I folded it and slipped it into my pocket. Thanks, Joe. But I only need one thing, the truth. He gave a dry chuckle. That's the thing about you. Most men chase safety. You chase balance. I shrugged. Justice isn't revenge, Joe. It's just the world regaining its weight. We sat quietly for a few minutes. The television in the corner muttered the morning news, Austin, Texas. Federal investigators continue probing multiple mortgage fraud cases. Joseph glanced at me. I didn't look up, just sipped my coffee. Sometimes destiny doesn't need a search party. It just turns on the TV and calls your name. On my way out, I stopped at the bronze sign by the door. The sunlight caught the engraved words, "No man left behind." I touched the metal cold solid and whispered, "Except the one who leaves his honor behind." By noon, I was home. The phone rang. Carter Johnson. His voice came through steady as ever. Robert, I've spoken with the bank and the legal department. Once you're ready to re-sign, we'll notarize and file in Travis County. Don't delay. Once it's in the system, Juliana can't escape it. How soon, I asked. Tomorrow, if you can drive to Austin. I'll have everything prepared, the power revocation forms, proof of separate assets, and the amended trust. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. Carter. I said slow and even, add one condition: Daniel only inherits after he proves he can support himself for 3 full years. A pause. You know he'll resent that. Good, I said. He needs to learn loss doesn't come from poverty. It comes from arrogance. I opened my notebook and wrote a new line, Phase 2 legal engagement. Below it, paper replaces bullets. I used to think justice had to be loud, I thought. But the things people truly fear, arrive in white envelopes, stamped certified copy. A text from Joseph appeared, you holding up. If you're tired, stop by the clinic for that heart check. I stared at it, didn't reply. My left hand rested over my chest, the beat slow, heavy, uneven. The body was wearing down, but the spirit still marching. I opened the drawer, took out the small pill bottle. Swallowed 2 tablets dry. The bitterness slid down my throat, sharp and real, like the taste of a night watch in combat, salty, burnt, but honest. Outside, the sunlight turned pale gold. I stood before the mirror, straightened my collar, shaved, adjusted my watch. A 60-year-old man stared back, gray hair, lined eyes, steady posture. No uniform, still a soldier. This war, I told, the reflection, needs no comrades, only the law. When I stepped outside, the river wind hit stronger. Maple leaves scraped across my boots. I locked the gate, the sharp metallic clack echoing in the quiet yard. On the road, the radio hummed with a news anchor's voice, federal tax fraud investigations expanding across Austin. I smiled. Justice was coming from the right direction. By late afternoon, I parked at the city cemetery. Rows of headstones stretched in perfect order, each marked by a small flag. I walked to Linda's stone, the engraving still clear. Beloved wife and mother. Her silence was her strength. I knelt, placing white chrysanthemums at the base. My voice came out soft, almost afraid to disturb the air. Linda, I'm about to do what you once told me to teach Daniel the lesson life taught me. Not to punish him, but so he'll remember who protected the Hughes name. I brushed dust from the stone. Sunlight filtered through the trees, glinting across the granite, like crystal lights from that wedding night. Only now. I didn't bow my head. I used to think a strong man was the one who pulled the trigger. Now I know it's the one who signs in the right place and stays silent at the right time. This war won't end with an explosion. It'll end with a red seal and the silence of those who thought they'd won. 3 weeks after that morning at the Veterans Hall, Savannah turned cold. The first autumn winds carried the smell of wet leaves and rusted metal. I sat in Carter Johnson's 12th floor office, a red brick building that looked straight out over the river. The room was bright, but not cheerful. Sunlight spilled through thick glass, laying gold stripes across rows of neatly stacked files. Each pile looked like ammunition, clean, precise, and perfectly legal. Carter stood across the table, sleeves rolled up, eyes fixed on his laptop. Amelia Grant sat beside him, double-checking every record, every number, every transaction. On the large monitor, a transfer line glowed in blue. Juliana B. Hughes. Personal account, $50,000. Source Hughes Logistics, LLC. Carter's voice was low, measured, the kind of tone used by men who prefer facts over emotion. This withdrawal happened within a month after the wedding. The company account was registered under Daniel, but every authorization came from Juliana's IP. No proxy, no disguise. That's our strongest evidence. I stared at the screen, those lines of code and numbers. Each character felt like a cut, no blood, but sharp enough to reach bone. Amelia closed the folder gently. Daniel doesn't know, she said softly, or he's pretending not to. I looked at her. Which one do you believe, Shaw? She didn't answer. The light caught her eyes, and in them I saw pity. Silence isn't always neutral, she whispered. Sometimes it's consent. Carter opened a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. Robert, here are the documents you need to sign. Once completed, all subsidiary accounts under the Veterans Living Trust will be locked within 90 days. Every access privilege, including Daniel's, will be suspended pending investigation. He paused. I want you to understand, once he finds out, there's no going back. I looked at the pages, crisp paper, small print, the raised seal of Travis County Court, shining faintly in the light. And I remembered what Linda once said. Sometimes love means letting them lose. I nodded slowly. Justice doesn't need to be fast, only certain. Carter pressed his lips together and nodded back. He slid the stack across the table and drew a black Parker fountain pen from his pocket, the same one Linda had given him the day we founded the trust. The door opened. Joseph Reed entered carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. Heard from Carter, he said, setting one down. Today's the day you fire the first shot. I didn't smile. No need for noise, Joe. A signature will do. He sat down beside me, studying my face. You sure about this? I've seen you sign death notices for brothers in uniform. But I've never seen you sign something that'll cost you your only son. I looked him straight in the eye. Remember what I told you, Joe? They shouldn't have assumed I'd stay still. Carter cleared his throat and began the procedure. He uncapped the pen and placed it gently in my hand. Robert, he said quietly, every signature is a goodbye. Be certain before you write. The pen felt heavier than metal. My hand trembled not from fear, but from weight. With every line I signed, it felt like carving a piece out of myself. The name Robert Hughes appeared 4 times on 4 different documents. The last one read, Amendment to Trust Ownership, Immediate Revocation of Secondary Beneficiary Access. I set the pen down. That's it. Carter exhaled. No, Robert, he said softly. That's just the beginning. The air in the room felt dense, metallic. Amelia gathered the papers into one bundle, tied them neatly with twine. Joseph pulled out a cigarette, turned it between his fingers, but didn't light it. No one spoke for a while. Only the low hum of the printer filled the silence, spitting out notarized copies one by one. I turned toward the window. The Savannah River shimmered below boats drifting past, leaving trails that widened and faded like time itself. Let them live under their own names, I said quietly. Some wars aren't about winning fast. You just let your enemy drain themselves in silence. Carter stood, placed a steady hand on my shoulder. I'll file these first thing tomorrow in Travis County. After that, the bank will issue official freezes to all connected accounts. Don't answer any calls from Austin Robert. Let them panic. Let them talk. I nodded. Carter, when justice arrives, I want it quiet. No reporters. No spectacle. He smiled faintly. Understood. We're not after victory. We're after truth. Joseph walked me to the door. Before I stepped into the elevator, he said softly, You remind me of our old commander in Baghdad. He used to say, a soldier never fires the first bullet out of hatred, only to end what needed ending. My throat tightened. Hatred makes people start, I said. But justice, that's what makes them finish. That afternoon, I sat on my porch again. Sunlight filtered through the trees, laying gold patches across the wooden table. I opened my notebook and wrote, Phase 3 Execution. Every signature carries a heartbeat. Above me, the clouds turned the color of bronze. A single dry maple leaf drifted down and landed on my sleeve. I held it in my palm, felt its brittle edge. Trust breaks the same way. Once snapped, it never bends again. That evening, my phone vibrated. A short message from Carter filed at 3:47 p.m. Case Ref Travis 234B, officially under review. I read it once, set the phone down. Outside, dusk deepened into indigo. The moon rose over the river. I made tea, watched the steam fade into the cool air, and thought of Daniel. Not with anger, not with sorrow, just the hollow quiet that remains when a father stops hoping. Once I fought for my country. Now I fight for my honor. Both demand the same thing, the calm before the trigger and the faith that the shot will land true. 2 months later, Austin had changed seasons. The sunlight softened and the sky turned the dull gray of October steel. News traveled faster than the wind. In the logistics and finance world, everyone had heard whispers of an unusual credit investigation involving Brooks and Hughes Freight, LLC, the very company Daniel once called the future of our generation. But the first I heard of it wasn't from the papers. It was from Amelia Grant. She called at dusk, her voice calm but tight. Robert Travis Bank just filed a formal audit. Juliana moved $50,000 from the business account to her personal one. Now every transaction is frozen. Daniel's trying to raise capital, but no bank will touch that name anymore. I didn't reply, just listened. Only one breath escaped me, long and quiet. Every debtor, I said, finally believes they still have time until the bank stops smiling. I hung up. The house in Savannah was still the air heavy with the scent of paper and dust. On the table lay the same old file, the Certified Veterans Living Trust, and the official freeze report. Carter had kept his word. Justice hadn't come fast, but it had arrived right on schedule. Outside, maple leaves covered the yard. The wind moved through them in a rhythm that sounded almost like breathing. And then the phone rang. Daniel. I let it ring 3 times before answering. His voice broke through the static, raw, desperate, each word, a gasp. Dad. Juliana says, "You froze the accounts. You can't do that. The company's collapsing. Everyone thinks I'm a fraud. They're saying there's a federal investigation. You have to say something." I stayed silent. Let him speak. Let the panic run its course. I remembered when he was a boy learning to ride a bike, falling, scraping his knees, crying the same way. Back then he cried because he'd fallen. Now he cried because he'd fallen too far. When he ran out of words, I spoke slow and clear. "You once told me I was outdated, that my time had passed and men like me didn't understand how the world worked. Now you see, Daniel, sometimes outdated means honest." Silence. Then Juliana's voice, faint and sharp in the background. "Don't beg him. Don't," Daniel snapped. "Be quiet, Juliana." The line went dead. I set the phone down, my hand still resting on the table. No joy, no hatred, just a quiet weight, deep and heavy as stone. I don't feel triumphant, I thought. No one really wins when justice arrives, only those who finally learn to bow. That night, Carter's email arrived, case Travis 234B under full review. Bank Fraud Division confirmed irregular activity under secondary user Juliana B. Hughes. Media expected to report within 48 hours. The monitor's glow reflected off my tired eyes, still alert. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't need to hear the pundits. Silence now was no longer defense. It was judgment. Morning headlines spread like wildfire. Young CEO Daniel Hughes under investigation for credit fraud. Beneath it, a photo Daniel leaving his office, shielding his face from the cameras. Juliana beside him, head down, dark glasses hiding her eyes. I didn't smile. I folded the paper shut. When a man loses his honor, a smile becomes cruelty. That afternoon, Joseph Reed stopped by, another paper in hand. "You've seen the news I have. How's it feel lighter?" I said. Not because they fell, but because truth finally showed up. He studied me for a moment, eyes filled with both pity and respect. "You know, Robert, I used to think your silence came from fear. Now I see it's how wise men win." I gave a faint smile. "No, Joe? I didn't win. I just stopped letting people step on my name." When he left, I sat by the window. Afternoon light slipped through the curtains and fell across the wedding photo of Linda. "You see it, Linda," I whispered. Everything fell on its own. I never had to lift a hand. I wiped a thin layer of dust from the frame. Her smile came through clear again, gentle, serene. Justice doesn't need speed, only certainty. And sometimes it wears the face of the dead. That night I went out to the porch. Savannah was still the river breathing against the shore. Waves tapped the rocks in slow, steady rhythm, like the city's own heartbeat. I poured a glass of whiskey. The moon turned the river silver. I raised my glass. "This isn't a toast, Linda. It's a farewell to the weaker part of me." The burn slid down my throat, but my heart felt colder. Morning came. Carter called. His tone was calm, almost gentle. "Robert, the bank officially locked every Hughes logistics account. Juliana will face federal questioning. Daniel may be called as a witness. You think he has the courage to tell the truth?" Carter paused. "Maybe people only learn honesty once they've lost everything else." "Then I hope he learns faster than I did," I said. That afternoon, I wrote another letter, not to send, just to let the heart breathe. Daniel. You once said the world had no use for men of principle. You were wrong. The world survives because a few still keep theirs, even when it costs them everything. I'm not angry with you. I only grieve that you never understood this once honor is gone money, and tears can't buy it back. I folded the letter and placed it inside the Semper Fidelis box beside the other 6. People ask me if revenge made me lighter. I tell them no, because this isn't revenge. It's arithmetic. They took my honor. I took back the truth. The balance is restored. Austin, Texas, November 2024. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the whole city were holding its breath before a storm no one dared to name. Downtown's glass towers reflected gold light onto rain-slick streets, oil sheen shimmer under the lamps. The first headline broke at 7 a.m. Brooks and Hughes freight under federal investigation. I sat alone in my small Savannah house watching the replay on TV. Gone were the glittering wedding photos, the glowing headlines about Austin's power couple. Now the screen showed Juliana hurrying through the doors of the federal courthouse, hair disheveled, dark glasses, her step unsteady as if she'd just received her sentence. Behind her, Daniel tried to steady her hand, but even that touch looked like a rope already fraying. The media called it the fall of the perfect bride. I didn't smile. I simply turned off the TV, poured a cup of coffee, and thought, sometimes the price of arrogance isn't loss. It's being forced to watch the truth crawl out into daylight. They say honor only matters on the battlefield, but in this country, the battlefield sits inside air-conditioned offices where a signature can be as deadly as a bullet. 2 days later, the Austin Chronicle released a special weekend issue. Front page, bold black type, you don't humiliate a veteran and walk away rich. I studied the photo, Juliana between 2 federal agents, face pale, mouth pressed tight. Below it, the subheadlines. Documents confirm fraudulent use of veteran ID for tax deduction. Loans co-signed without consent. IP address traced to Brooks' residence. And in the middle of that investigative spread was a quote from Harper Jones, the journalist I'd met at last year's charity dinner. Sometimes justice doesn't wear a robe. Sometimes it wears silence. I folded the paper. No need to read more. Once truth is printed, it spreads faster than fire. That morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Old brothers in arms from the 91st Logistics Division sent texts, photos, calls. We've got your back, brother. You stood tall like always. One message carried a picture from 1987 me standing in formation, flag in hand. Under it, someone had written, "Integrity doesn't retire." I didn't reply. Just saved them all. Silence was enough. Because gratitude doesn't always need a voice. Meanwhile, Juliana's world began to crack apart. The bank froze every personal account. The logistics license was suspended. Her attorney withdrew, citing conflict of interest. Everyone knew what that meant. No one wanted to sink with that ship. The news replayed footage of her leaving the law office, hair-tangled skin, colorless lips trembling. Behind her, the reporters fired questions like gunshots. Mrs. Hughes, did you forge the veteran's signature? Did Daniel know about the loans? She didn't answer. Just kept walking each step, a slow tick of justice counting down. I watched her face on the screen and remembered the wedding night, the microphone in her hand, that honey-poisoned voice whispering before she slapped me, "Give me the house key. You don't need it anymore." Now those same hands trembled with nothing left to hold. As for Daniel, he stayed silent until he saw it all himself. A former employee later told me what happened. Mr. Hughes walked into the office mid-meeting. Mrs. Juliana was shouting at her lawyer, "You don't understand, I did it for you." And the lawyer said, "You can't forge your father-in-law's ID and expect to walk away, Mrs. Hughes. That's a federal crime." Daniel stood in the doorway, said nothing, didn't defend her, just looked at the woman he'd called brilliant and brave, and saw a stranger crushed under her own greed. In that moment, I believe he finally understood the father humiliated in public had never been weak. He'd simply waited for the right moment to strike back. That night, Daniel called Joseph Reed. His voice was rough, small. "Did he ever hate me?" Joseph paused. "No, he was just disappointed. Disappointed that you let someone else define your worth." Silence filled the line, only breathing. Then the call ended. I sat in the dark, the TV light flickering against Linda's photograph. On screen, Harper Jones spoke again, calm, unhurried, the tone of someone who knows truth doesn't need drama. The investigation into Juliana Brooks Hughes continues. Court documents confirm use of a veteran's identity in fraudulent tax filings without consent. The veteran community has requested a full federal review. The glow brushed across Linda's face in the frame. Her smile looked softer than ever. "You see, Linda," I whispered, "no gunfire. And still justice knows when to strike." The next day, Harper called. "Mr. Sir Hughes, I know you dislike attention, but the Veterans Association is holding a candlelight vigil at Riverfront Square. They want to honor you, the man who protected his name in peacetime." I went quiet. "That's not necessary, Harper. I don't need to be honored. Just remembered that honor still exists." Her voice warmed. "People will remember Mr. Hughes. Trust me." Evening fell. Savannah breathed softly again. In the distance, a ship's horn echoed from the harbor. The yellow porch light cast long shadows on the old wall where my medals once hung. Now only the empty hook remained. A mail carrier stopped at the gate, leaving a single white envelope stamped United States District Court. I didn't open it. Didn't have to. I already knew. A federal summons Juliana Brooks Hughes, and beneath her name, Daniel Hughes, witness. I stared at it a moment, then turned off the light. "Justice is never late," I murmured. "It only waits until the ground beneath the proud begins to sink. When that happens, you don't need to push. They fall on their own. And when the noise is gone, one thing remains standing: honor." Savannah. December. The sky was a solid sheet of gray, no stars, no moon, only the yellow of the streetlight sliding through the window, a thin cold beam dividing what's still alive from what's almost gone. Inside the small house, the wall clock ticked steady and patient like a soldier's footsteps on midnight patrol. No cars, no wind. Only silence, the heaviest sound a man can hear. I sat at my desk. Before me lay an unopened bottle of heart pills, a few old folders, and a photo of Linda taken in 1982. That smile, 40 years old now, still bright enough to outshine the lamp. Beside it rested a folded flag, the creases sharp, the corners gleaming like metal. I brushed my hand across it. "You folded it for me once," I whispered. "Now I just hope to see it one last time." I opened the drawer and took out a blank sheet of paper. Not a contract. Not a legal form. Just a letter. The final one. "People say revenge turns the heart cold," I began to write. Maybe they're right. But I never wanted revenge. I only wanted truth to be put back in its rightful place, even if it costs me my last breath. The light glowed across Linda's photo. Her eyes looked peaceful, as if she were listening to a story already finished. "You see, Linda," I said softly, "I kept my word. No shouting, no gunfire, only the truth. I uncapped the pen, black ink thick and cool. Each stroke trembled, but stayed true the heartbeat of a man writing his goodbye. Daniel, I wrote, you can lose your company, your money, your reputation. But if you keep your respect for yourself and for others, then you haven't lost everything. Respect is the only inheritance left when all else disappears. I paused. The pen still full of ink, but my hand already heavy, not from age, but from knowing each word was a step away from this world. A gust slid through the window crack, lifting the curtain. Streetlight rippled across the desk, casting two faint silhouettes, mine and Linda's, facing each other, two spirits in a room not yet dark. I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote on the front hand, unsteady, for Daniel Hughes, to be opened after the reading of the trust. Then I opened the final folder, Trust Amendment, transfer of all assets to the Hughes Honor Foundation. I read each line slowly. No ceremony, no sentiment, just purpose to establish a foundation providing scholarships and housing for young veterans. The ones still fighting their own invisible wars. The ones who never had a Linda to come home to. I drew a breath, signed my name, Robert A. Hughes. The ink spread heavy, final a farewell carved in black. Carter once said, every signature is a goodbye. Tonight he was right. I stacked everything neatly, documents, envelope, pen tied together with an old nylon cord from Iraq still blackened at one end. I laid them in the center of the desk, the folded flag on top. Under the lamp, the red stripe glowed faintly, no longer blood or victory, just the color of a heart that stopped without regret. Soldiers don't only die on battlefields, I murmured. Some fights are silent, fought with signatures, with letters, with the decision not to strike back. Those bullets never fire, but they still pierce what's evil. I stood at the window. Savannah's night was motionless. The bridge lights shimmered over the river waves, beating slow like the city's weakening pulse. I remembered Linda's question the day I came home from Iraq. Are you afraid of dying? She'd asked. No, I'd said. I'm afraid of having nothing worth living for. Now I finally knew what's worth living for is also what's worth dying with. Honor. I returned to the desk, opened the pillbox, touched one tablet, then closed it again. I wasn't choosing to die. I was choosing to stop at the right time. The clock showed 11:45. The minute and second hands met like two soldiers keeping an appointment. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the small bedside light. On the table, the flag, the letter, the old military watch, frozen since 2007, the day Linda left. I lay back, hands resting on my chest. The wind moved the curtain once more. A car passed outside, then nothing. People think justice is the sound of a gavel, I thought. But sometimes it's the moment a heart stops and there's no anger left. I closed my eyes. No wedding, no slap, no shame. Only Linda standing in a field of light white dress, lavender bouquet. Come home, Robert, she said. I'm on my way, I answered. Morning. The first sunlight slid through the glass, resting on the folded flag. Joseph Reed knocked. No reply. When he entered, he found me lying still, hand resting on the flag, a faint smile on my lips. On the desk, the ink still glistened wet. Beside it, the envelope marked, for Daniel Hughes. Joseph opened it gently, reading the first line aloud, voice breaking, respect is the only inheritance left when everything else is gone. He set the letter down, straightened his posture, and gave a slow, perfect salute, the kind reserved for brothers who've gone home. I was once a soldier, once a father, once a man humiliated. But when I closed my eyes, I was only a man who kept his word. No shouting, no guns, only the truth. April 2025. Savannah woke in pale silver light, thin as breath. Magnolia leaves outside the porch still held the last of the night's dew, tiny beads falling like the final sighs of spring. The air was soft heavy, as if the city itself knew this would be a day of silence. The flag out front moved slow, its fabric brushing the wind like the calm breathing of a sleeping soldier. Joseph Reed drove up just as he had every Sunday for years. A box of warm muffins sat on the seat beside him, and the morning paper folded neat. It was their ritual. He'd bring breakfast, Robert would open the door, and they'd talk about everything in the world except the past. But this morning Joseph lingered at the gate. The door was ajar. No footsteps. No scent of coffee. Only the wind slipping through the frame and the distant tick of the wall clock. "Robert," he called softly. "You awake?" No answer. He stepped inside, past the hallway, past the wall of military photos. The sunlight reached the portrait of Robert in uniform, 1987, a young man's face, eyes hard as forged steel. On the table, a cold cup of tea and a bundle of papers tied with a frayed green cord, the one Robert had carried home from Iraq. The bedroom door stood half open. Light cut through it, thin, clean, precise as a blade. Robert Hughes lay there, hands resting on the folded flag. His face held no pain, only a small, gentle smile, the kind a man wears when he knows the war is over. Morning light brushed his lips. The smile looked alive. Joseph stood still for a long time, then straightened, raised his hand in salute. "Rest easy, soldier," he whispered. "Mission accomplished." The funeral took place 3 days later in the garden behind Robert's home, the same place Linda once planted white roses. They were in bloom now, filling the air with a sweetness that belonged not to death, but to rest. 3 American flags lined the path, fluttering softly. Each time the wind blew, the fabric touched itself, a quiet rhythm beneath the choir's distant hymn. No trumpets, no speeches. Just silence, the sound reserved for those who lived with honor. On the front row sat Daniel beside Juliana Carter, Amelia, and the veterans in dress blues. No one spoke. Even the air seemed afraid to move. Pastor Allen, former military chaplain, stepped forward and removed his cap. His voice was low, steady. Robert Hughes doesn't need anyone to speak for him. He left his final words himself, not in a bugle's note, but in a letter. From a red-sealed envelope, Allen unfolded a worn sheet of paper. Carter nodded. He had held it in trust until this day. Allen began to read, his voice carrying over the roses and the wind. "Daniel, I love you. But love doesn't mean letting you destroy what's right. Some values are built with blood, not money. If you once thought my silence was weakness today, you know silence can fight too." He turned the page. "Juliana, thank you. You reminded me that contempt can be the very thing that keeps a man standing tall. I forgive you not because you deserve it, but because hate is the only thing I refuse to leave behind." The pastor's voice trembled on the last line. Each word fell like the heartbeat of the man they buried, slow, heavy, true. Daniel bowed his head. His hands clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. Juliana stared at the ground, eyes open but hollow. There were no excuses left, no scaffolding to hold her pride. Carter's fingers gripped the edge of his chair. Amelia dabbed her eyes, fighting back a sob. Behind them, the veterans rose as one, right hands over hearts. The wind lifted the flags, their fabric whispering with the faint sound of distant trumpets. Pastor Allen folded the letter, his voice now barely above prayer. He wrote one last line. "Silence is not the end. It's how truth outlives us." 2 young soldiers stepped forward, their movements deliberate, ritualistic. They folded the flag over the coffin corner to corner, crease to crease, each motion slow and sacred. The sound of fabric meeting fabric was steady as breathing, the rhythm of a promise kept. When the triangle was perfect, they placed it in Joseph's hands. He held it for a moment, then turned to Daniel. No anger, no blame. Only the deep quiet of a man who's seen too many goodbyes. "He wanted me to give this to you," Joseph said. Daniel stood. His hands trembled as he received it. The cloth was cool against his skin, a current running through him, not pain, but reckoning. In that instant he felt his father again, not accusing, just reminding. He bowed his head. Tears fell soundlessly onto the grass. No one moved. No one tried to comfort him. Some grief cannot be shared. It must be carried. "I used to think honor only mattered while you were alive," Daniel whispered. "But maybe it can still save you even after you're gone." Carter stepped closer, hand on Daniel's shoulder. "He didn't hate you," he said softly. "He just wanted you to understand doing what's right isn't easy. But if you manage it once, you'll never have to live in shame again." Daniel nodded, no words, only breath, as if he'd been sentenced and freed at the same time. Juliana sat motionless, her hands bloodless from clenching. Her eyes were empty, where pride used to live, only the shell remained. Amelia watched her for a long moment, then whispered, barely audible, "Some people have to lose everything to learn what enough means." When Pastor Allen reached the final line of the register, his voice cracked. Robert Hughes, a soldier who kept fighting long after the war. The trumpet sounded, low, lingering, fading into wind. White rose petals lifted into the air, swirling like quiet snow over the garden. No one spoke. No one left. They simply watched, because everyone knew they were witnessing the most beautiful kind of justice, the justice of silence. Daniel held the folded flag tight. He looked up. A single beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, falling on the coffin and on the portrait of his father smiling above it. Time seemed to stop. He whispered, voice breaking, "I'm sorry, Dad." That morning, Savannah held its breath. No one heard my voice, but they saw what I left behind, a letter, a flag, and a lesson that once honor is kept, it never dies. 1 month after the funeral, Savannah exhaled. The sky was a soft, washed blue, the kind that looked fragile enough to break. The river breeze carried the scent of salt and steel, and the magnolias outside Robert Hughes's porch shimmered with new buds. The city had returned to its rhythm, fishermen at dawn, joggers by the Riverwalk church bells, echoing through the late morning air. But in newsrooms and living rooms across Georgia, his name hadn't faded yet. Harper Jones sat in her office at the Savannah Morning Chronicle, a mug of cold coffee beside her, and the faint hum of the old printer filling the silence. On her screen was the story she'd rewritten a dozen times, a story not of scandal, but of legacy. 3 pages, title bold, "The Last Lesson of Robert Hughes." The first photo filled the entire top fold. Robert standing in the doorway of his old workshop, hands holding the folded flag, eyes steady, a man stripped of everything but dignity. Her opening line read, "He didn't seek recognition. He sought back his honor. And by doing so, he made a city remember what it had forgotten." Within hours, the article spread across social media. Veterans reposted it with the same caption, "Honor doesn't retire." Comments poured in from soldiers, from widows, from strangers. "We still have men like him. He fought the quiet war and won. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it salutes." In Austin, Daniel read the article alone. The apartment was still a single chair, a lamp, an unopened box that once held company papers. Outside, the city buzzed. Inside, the only sound was the ticking of a clock he hadn't set since his father's death. He scrolled to the last photo, his father's coat collar turned up, the folded flag resting in his hands like a promise. On his phone screen, the last message still waited unread for months. "You'll understand soon." Now at last he did. Not about the money, not about the trust, but about what his father had been trying to teach all along, that respect isn't something you demand, it's something you live for. Daniel opened his desk drawer and took out the small envelope Carter had handed him the day of the funeral. The handwriting shook, but the words were unmistakable. "Honor doesn't retire." Inside a single slip of paper, only one sentence. "You don't need to inherit my wealth, only my dignity." Daniel sat with it for a long time. He could almost hear his father's voice, calm, patient, unyielding, the same tone that once taught him how to hold a hammer, how to salute, how to stand back up after failure. He folded the note, placed it back in the envelope, and whispered, "All right, Dad. I hear you." Then he stood, put on his jacket, and stepped out. That same morning, Savannah hosted a quiet ceremony at the Veterans Hall. The spring air was cool, carrying faint notes of brass polish and coffee. A new name had been engraved on the memorial wall, Robert Hughes. For his service, his silence, and his truth. Dozens gathered, old soldiers, their wives, children clutching flags. The choir hummed a low hymn, the kind of sound that felt like memory itself. Daniel walked to the front, a bouquet of white roses trembling slightly in his hands. He knelt before the bronze plaque, laid the flowers gently beneath his father's name, and traced each letter with his thumb. The metal was cold, but alive with sunlight. "I used to think honor belonged to the past," he murmured. "But standing here, I realize it's the only thing that outlives us." Behind him, rows of veterans lifted their right hands in salute. The sound of flags brushing in the breeze was steady, rhythmic, like a single collective heartbeat. Harper Jones stood nearby, camera in hand. She filmed quietly, saying nothing. Through her lens, she caught everything: the curve of light on the flag, the trembling breath of a son, and the way Daniel whispered to the photo of his father. "You were right, Dad. Justice never needed to be loud." That evening, the footage aired nationwide. Harper's voice carried over the images, steady, reverent, clear. Today, the Hughes Honor Foundation awarded its first scholarship to a 12-year-old boy, the son of a soldier who died in Fallujah. The camera found the boy standing at the microphone, a jacket slightly too big, his shoes barely touching the floor. "I don't know who Mr. Hughes was," he said softly, "but my mom said he helped me believe that honor still exists. I want to grow up to be like him." Applause filled the hall, slow rising like a wave. Daniel sat in the back row, eyes wet, hands clasped. He didn't clap, he just nodded. Because redemption doesn't need applause. It needs understanding. After the ceremony, Carter Johnson approached him. They shook hands in silence before Carter spoke. "He'd be proud of you, Daniel." Daniel shook his head. His voice came low. "He doesn't need to be proud. He just needs to know I won't disgrace his name again." Carter's lips curved slightly. "That's enough." That night, Harper posted one final photo to her social feed. Robert Hughes, framed by the doorway of his workshop, sunlight spilling behind him, the folded flag glowing in his hands. Her caption read, "He fought quietly, but he won louder than all." The image spread across the country. Veterans groups reposted it. Retired teachers, small-town mechanics, and single mothers shared it too. Even teenagers who'd never known a soldier left comments beneath. "We still have men like him. That means hope isn't dead." The post reached millions. But for Daniel, it wasn't about numbers. It was about closure. He replied once under his father's photo, "My father taught me that war doesn't only happen on battlefields. The greatest battle is within us between right and wrong, pride and humility." He won. Not with noise, but with silence that made the world listen. The last evening of May came soft and gold. The sun lingered low, painting the savannah rooftops in copper and shadow. Daniel returned to his father's house. The porch still creaked the same way. The clock inside still ticked, but the silence no longer hurt. He walked to the table. The photo of his parents stood there, the same one his father had once kept behind the curtain. Daniel set the folded flag beside it. His reflection flickered faintly in the glass. "Dad," he whispered, "I've made it home." Outside from the community field, the national anthem drifted through the air. He stood straight, heels together, and saluted, slow, deliberate, precise. It wasn't a goodbye anymore. It was a vow. They can take reputation. They can steal wealth or power. But they can never take honor. Because for those who carry it, the battle never ends. They just change uniforms and keep fighting in the hearts of the living. The flag on the porch rustled once, catching the last light of day. Somewhere a church bell rang, and as the screen faded to black, the voice returned, deep, steady, final. People say justice needs to shout to be heard. But the truth is, when it's real, it speaks in silence. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stands in silence and still wins. Tell me where you're watching from. Tap, like if you believe honor never dies. Subscribe for more stories where silence speaks louder than revenge.